My name is Hannah Decker, and I have been a California resident, California native, since I was born. I grew up mostly in Northern California, in Chico, California, and as such, I've seen the water supply over the last few years just really dwindle severely. I grew up around Lake Orville, Lake Shasta, Lake Siskiyou, and all of these just beautiful reservoirs, places of habitat for wildlife and nature, places of recreation where families go vacation, are just puddles. I've seen the farming community be completely altered and changed by nature and by climate change and by the drought. And I think just Northern Californians in general seem to have a better idea of how serious it is just because it's so visually apparent.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Albert, and I live in Malibu, and I'm here to talk about droughts. I happen to be a climate change believer and feel like we've caused our drought by the pollutants we've been putting into the air for the last 100 years, which have changed our ozone layer to the point that now there's these huge climatic changes that are happening that are affecting people all over the world, and I think our drought is part of that. Well, we've had to cut way back on all of our watering, and our landscapes are dying, our hills are brown, so our risk of fire is much higher than it's ever been. I think everybody has been affected by it on some level if they're paying attention and rationing like they're supposed to. We've cut our water back by, I'd say, at least 50%. Shorter showers. But I think it's actually a good thing to be aware of the resources that you use. So in some ways it's been educational for people to realize that it's not an endless resource, that it's something that they have to pay attention to and how much they use. I had heard about rebate programs that were offered through the state that would pay you to replace your turf. And so we had this lawn that I had been watering for the last several, 20 years, and everybody had a lawn, and I think most people don't have lawns now. And I'd been feeling really guilty about it for the last 3 years about how much water it used. And I just thought, you know what, there's so many better ways to landscape a yard and that you don't have to have grass. So with the incentive of being paid to replace it, I looked around for the programs that I knew were actually reliable and actually did pay people, and I applied and got accepted. And so we replaced 2,500 square feet of our lawn with decomposed granite and gravel and succulents and native plants that don't take that much water, and we love it. We spend more time out there than we did before when there was grass, because we feel really good about it. It has a nice positive energy out there, and we've done something good for the environment too, hopefully, by cutting back on the amount of water we use. I think that people could cut back a lot more than they have. Personally, I feel like we did something pretty drastic. I think a lot of people that live in this community, especially in Malibu, West LA, have a lot of money, and they're just happy to spend more on their water bill. And I'm actually acutely aware of when I drive around and I see landscapes that are heavily watered now. I almost want to go knock on their doors and say, you guys are taking too much of this. You shouldn't, you're using too much. You're not paying attention to what they're telling us. I don't waste a drop of water. If I have a glass with water in it that's been sitting there for a couple days and I don't want to drink it anymore, it goes into a plant. And when I wash my dishes in the sink, the water goes outside onto a tree, even if it has a little bit of soap in it. The soap's biodegradable.
I'm Associate Director of the Public Policy Institute of California's Water Policy Center, which means I oversee research and operations for our center, but I also participate in policy research questions and publications here as well. California water policy is a very complex issue, but it's also something that the state has been grappling with since it became a state and before. California has a very variable climate, so every year we could be dealing with floods or we could be dealing with droughts. So managing our water in California in an effective and sustainable way is something that we've always dealt with long before this drought, and something that we'll continue to deal with because there will be another drought after this one and there'll be another flood. In California, water is mainly managed at the local level. So a lot of, depending on where you live, your water could come from either just right below you in the ground, or it could be brought in through like an infrastructure system or pipes from different places. So for example, I'm sitting in San Francisco right now, and our water mainly comes from the Sierra Nevadas in a reservoir known as Hetch Hetchy. So it travels a long way to get to us, whereas some cities in California don't have to look any further than a reservoir in their own backyard. If you were to look at water use in California very simply and only broke it down into 3 categories, which was water used for cities and people, water used for farms and growing our food, and water used for the environment. It could be broken up as 10% for cities and people, 40% for farms, and 50% for the environment. So in a drought year like this, and the environment takes the biggest hit because they don't have their own reservoirs, they don't have their own groundwater basins, they can't pump as much. Fish don't have water management skills the way that we do. The largest kind of consumptive use or use of water that has a economic purpose is our farming. The water has become at the forefront of a lot of Californians' minds when in the past it hasn't, and the media has played a really big role in that. PPIC does a statewide survey, like a public opinion survey, every 6 weeks or so, and one of the questions we usually ask is, what do you think is California's top concern, or should be Californians' top concern? And forever it's always been jobs in the economy, and for the first time in the history of us doing that survey, water bypassed jobs in the economy as the top issue in California. And I think that the media has a big role in that, in the sense that it has been covering the drought pretty closely. You see stories in almost every form of media, both newspapers and NPR and radio and blogs, and people seem to be really picking up on both the human story of what's going on with the drought, but also lately a lot of coverage of policy decisions and environmental issues as well. So we used to not have any laws to manage our groundwater, so the water below ground, that we now have legislation that was passed in 2014 that creates a framework for us to begin using that resource more sustainably. Essentially, it means that we can't keep pumping, and especially in some parts of the Central Valley, we can't keep pumping water unsustainably without figuring out how to recharge those basins. So that is one huge change that is going to take some time to implement, but I think is a long-term change. I think that one thing that Californians need to realize is the complexity of this issue, and that it's not as simple as kind of like, what's the one big solution that's going to save California? Do we need a big desal plant? Do we need to build a tunnel from Seattle and get all their water? You know, like, there's not really there isn't one solution that's going to be a silver bullet. But that we have lots of tools in our tool belt that we can use around the state to help solve this problem. One hope that I have is that we don't go back to just business as usual once it starts raining, because this is not the last drought California will have, and the next time we have a drought, there'll probably be more businesses and more people and more uses for water. So using the lessons from this drought and holding on to them as we move forward, I think is really important.
The California drought has been in effect for more than 4 years now. From Northern California to Southern California, everyone and everything has been affected in some way or another. Farmers are pumping more groundwater than ever before, in ways that are changing the landscape. The San Joaquin Valley itself has sunk a number of inches since the drought due to overuse of groundwater supplies. Although this may seem drastic, humans only use 10% of the water allocated to the state of California. 40% is used by agriculture, and 50% is used to conserve the environment. Water reservoirs, lakes, and rivers are slowly and surely dwindling. Be aware, be conscious,